So I've really enjoyed the memes that we've had throughout this series. They just kind of sum it up. And the meme for today about Moses being in a really bad mood and partying everything, I think it's totally appropriate. So I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Some time ago, a flood was on its way, forcing everyone to evacuate the area. The police rode up to the home of the most pious woman in town and said, "Ma'am, a flood is on the way, and you're going to have to evacuate your house." The woman replied, "No, I'm not leaving. God has always helped me before, and he will help me again." So as the water rose higher, she went to the second story of her house. And another boat came by, and the captain yelled, "Ma'am, you have to get on this boat, or you're going to drown." The woman replied again, "No, God helped me before. He will help me again." The water rose even higher. This time she went to the top of the house, to the roof, where a helicopter came along and hovered overhead. The pilot yelled into his loudspeaker, "Please climb aboard, ma'am. You are going to drown." The woman sniffed and again replied, "God is going to save me." Well, the water rose higher, and soon she drowned. She went to heaven, and there she asked God, "Lord, why didn't you help save me?" And God said, "I did help. I sent you 2 boats and a helicopter." You know, almost all of us has a fear of something. Floods, darkness, heights, dying, sharks, snakes, losing everything to a fire, tornado, or a hurricane, rejection, abandonment, and the list goes on. For me, I can't say that this is a disabling fear, but I really hate creepy, crawly little things like spiders, cockroaches, and even crickets. I can do snakes, but not bugs. Most of these things are basically harmless, but I really have an aversion to those creatures. In fact, when one of those uninvited guests come into our house, I usually call my wife to come and set the little creatures free outside or send them on to bug heaven. It's silly, I know, but there you go. So, what do you fear? Isolation? Being left behind? Failure, rejection? Losing your home or your job? Taxes? Or even death? I like a sign I saw once. It said, "Fear is the enemy, but faith is your defense." I'd like to think that we would all have enough faith to follow God, but think about it. Have you ever taken that leap of faith and stepped into the unknown? In Numbers 14, 1-4, we read, "Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. And all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. They said to them, 'Would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in the wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and little ones will become prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt?' And then they said to one another, 'Let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt.'" In today's reading, the Israelite people lifted up their voices and wept after hearing the report from the 12 spies who were sent out to check on the land of Canaan. The report was bad. It was scary. Yes, it was as beautiful as God had promised. But it was defended by fortified cities and gigantic people. It would be impossible for them to claim it. Although this land was relatively small, only 150 miles long and 60 miles wide, it had lush hillsides that were covered with fig, date, and nut trees. All that wilderness travel for nothing. So first they railed against Moses and Aaron, then against the Lord, and even had the audacity to suggest that they should appoint a captain and return to Egypt. How easy it was to forget God's past mercies and miracles. Even with God's promise that this land was their promised land, they refused to enter because of fear. Moses pleaded with God to forgive his people. As we have learned through this series, the Israelites had previously failed 10 times to trust God, not the least of which was the fact that they lacked trust when they crossed the Red Sea. They collected more than their daily quota of manna. They complained over the lack of water at Rephidim by building a golden calf and worshiping it. And the list goes on. Why didn't the people have faith in what God had promised them? Like the woman waiting for God to save her, God promised the Israelites everything along the way. Yet at the very edge of the promised land, they refused to enter because of fear. How tragic and how disappointing for God. But through God's infinite patience, He allowed His people to live. But they were doomed to wander the desert for another 40 years until that generation died and their children inherited the promised land. So friends, what if you were faced with what the Israelites heard from the 12 spies who had just returned from Canaan? Would you be more inclined to go back to slavery because at least you knew what to expect? Or would you forge ahead into the unknown? Would you believe what God had promised to give you and take the leap of faith by entering your promised land? So what is faith? Something to note is that our perspective of the things around us is very important to our success. We need to speak out words of faith against adversity. We read in Numbers 14:28, God said, "As surely as I live, I will do to you the very thing I heard you say." Whether it's shouted or in a whisper, God will hear our words of faith or lack of faith and will respond to what we say. Our prayers are the seed of what comes to pass in our life. The seed of what we might now call the new normal. Let me say that again. Our prayers are the seed of what comes to pass in our lives. So we hear a lot about the new normal. What is it? The Hebrews wanted to go back to Egypt, to their old ways, the old normal, when they were in the wilderness. In our case, following COVID-19 virus, will we go back to the old ways or choose faith over fear and find and embrace a new normal? Today, we are in the middle of an unknown future. 6 feet apart, face masks, washing our hands, no blowing out birthday candles, no shaking hands when greeting someone, and no singing. Is this going to last forever? In some ways, our shelter in place has been a wilderness experience, and it still is. Haven't many of us felt lonely and abandoned in the last 7 months? When we get the okay to resume a more normal life, will we run ourselves ragged with overly full schedules, sports, obligations, activities? Or does God have something else planned for us? Under God's leadership, why do we fear the new normal and long to go back to the old normal? As we come out of the pandemic mode, what will become of us? What will we look like? Business as usual? Or have we learned something? Is there something better? Will we focus on God in our decisions to try to go to our own way? The Gate of the Year is a popular name given to a poem by Minnie Louise Haskins entitled God Knows. The poem, written in 1908, was part of a collection titled The Desert. It caught the public attention and the popular imagination when King George VI quoted it in his 1939 Christmas broadcast to the British Empire. And I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year, "Give me a light that I might tread safely into the unknown." And he replied, "Go out into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God. That shall be to you better than light and safer than a known way." So I went forth, and finding the hand of God, trod gladly into the night. And he led me toward the hills and the breaking of the day in the lone east. So heart, be still. What need our little life, our human life, to know, if God hath comprehension? In all the dizzy strife of things both high and low, God hideth his intention. God knows. His will is best. The stretch of years which wind ahead, so dim to our imperfect vision, are clear to God. Our fears are premature. In him all time hath full provision. Then rest until God moves to lift the veil from our impatient eyes, when as the sweeter features of life's stern face we hail, fair beyond all surmise, God's thought around his creatures our mind shall fill. Friends, COVID-19 isn't just about face masks and hand sanitizer and social distancing. It's also about teaching us more about following the leadership of God. This is a watershed moment for us. What path will we choose? We don't know what lies ahead for us, but we have God's promise that God will take care of us. So when situations look bleak, look to God. Look to God and lean on your faith, even though you don't know what lies ahead. Reading from the New Living Translation, Numbers 14:24, it reads, "But my servant Caleb has a different attitude than the others have. He has remained loyal to me, so I will bring him into the land he explored. Now, when God speaks about Caleb's attitude, God is speaking about Caleb's different spirit, or his attitude, which was a belief of mind and actions, which followed God's design. The truth is, all of us have an attitude, some good, some bad, some indifferent, but attitudes nonetheless. Attitude is more to do with the position you take, which prompts or causes certain behaviors in you. An attitude is not being aloof or snooty. An attitude could be a position you take on something. It could be the way you view something. It could be the stance you've taken in life that actually has nothing to do with you. But our attitude has everything to do with the way we see things and the way we see life. Our biggest challenge in life is to make sure we follow God's guidance. So, what kind of attitude would God say you have? Do you have faith that God will be your guide and direct you through this unknown time? So many of us would rather depend on ourselves to fix things rather than to accept the unseen future through faith in God. Years ago, a guy named Joe found himself in dire trouble. His business had gone bust, and he was in serious financial trouble. He was so desperate that he decided to go to God and ask for help. He began to pray, God, please help me. I've lost my business, and if I don't get some money, I'm going to lose my house as well. Please let me win the lotto. Well, lotto night came, and someone else won. Again, Joe prayed, God, please let me win the lotto. I've lost my business, my house, and now I'm going to lose my car as well. Lotto night came, and Joe still had no luck. Once again he prayed, my God, why have you forsaken me? I've lost my business, my house, and my car. My wife and children are starving. I don't ask you for much. I don't ask you for help all the time, and I've been a really good servant to you. Please, just let me win this lotto one time so I can get my life back together. Suddenly, there was a blinding flash of light as the heavens opened, and Joe was confronted by the voice of God himself. Joe, could you meet me halfway on this? Buy a ticket. If we want to start seeing the promise of God manifest in our lives, we need to release our fears and expand our faith. And maybe buy a lottery ticket. But ultimately, know that God has promised that He will take care of us. God will provide. Our faith is kind of like Wi-Fi. It's invisible, but it has the ability to connect you to the power you need. The challenge for each of us is to align our focus with God's focus, to align our attitudes our opinions and our actions with God's will and word. My friends, the bottom line is faith is an attitude that can conquer all fear. Amen.